Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to the Aviva and Cambridge annual event. A big warm welcome from us all here. We've got a really packed agenda, and welcome if you're joining us through both the live portal or indeed on YouTube, which is very exciting for us. My name is Stefan Mikowski, and I'm the head of data strategy here at Aviva, and also one of the members of the management team for the partnership we have with Cambridge University. We've got a really packed agenda for you, and there's going to be an opportunity later on for you to ask some questions as part of a Q&A session. So for those of you joining through the portal, you should see a question box to enter those in below the video. And for those of you joining through YouTube, that should be to the right of the video you see. So you can submit your questions through there, and that comes a bit later in our agenda today. We've got lots to get on with, as I said, a really packed agenda and some great speakers. So without hesitation, I'm going to hand us over to our first speaker, Owen Morris, who will then be followed by Andy Neely, and then you'll be back to me for the rest of the agenda. So over to you, Owen. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. So look, first of all, huge welcome to everyone for joining the partnership showcase this morning. Hopefully you'll find it three things. I think we get three things out of it. One is some thought-provoking content and some real engagement in terms of data science analytics, and also you may even get a smidgen of entertainment, but I'm not promising that. I think when I think about data and analytics, and I think about a couple of things, but we've got two great institutions that have come together for the last 2 years to try and start to push the agenda in that area. I say great, I mean, we thought we were old at Aviva at 324 years of age. Turns out we've actually for once got a partner who's older than us with Cambridge at over 800 years. And I think we've both got a tremendous amount of excitement to push the data science boundaries. When you think about insurance, people don't always think about data as their sort of first calling card. They probably think about slightly boring people and that sort of thing. Actually, data has been at the heart of insurance for, well, probably 324 years. Not a great leap to imagine people when they first started talking about insuring ships for the very second question to be, so how big is your ship? How many tons is it? Where's it going? Certainly it's true very early in life insurance, people started saying, well, hang on a minute, if you're a bit older, it might be a bit more expensive. And as we roll the clock forward, you start to see data being embedded even more, and indeed computer science, the first computer delivered to Aviva in 1960, one of the earliest commercial computers in the world. Fortunately, now we have decommissioned it. So that's great. And equally, you go to the 90s, you start seeing our first exploration of big data with generalized linear models and what were then huge data sets with millions of rows, groundbreaking stuff. Then you go to the mid-2000s and you start thinking about, actually, you had to understand what a terabyte was for the first time when you started talking about location data. And then we get into the very modern era of using data to remove all the friction from customer experiences. We start to understand what customers are telling us. We use AI to read medical reports. And we're starting to even use it to understand things like ESG and helping make more ethical choices around our investments. So look, data's been at the heart of insurance and investment for pretty much the whole of our existence in terms of Aviva. When we think about the excitement with this partnership is actually keeping us right at the edge of it. And I think it does that in a number of different ways. The first and most obvious is the research we do together, which is literally fantastic. And I'm not going to steal anyone's thunder because they'll be much better at describing it than me. But some of the big sort of problems that just aren't perhaps restricted to insurance around data science, such as explainability of algorithms, and things like algorithmic bias, and how do we start thinking about that, really benefit from that shared collaboration across the two institutions. And I think when you think sort of perhaps some of the more sort of commercial edge stuff like supply chain management and that sort of thing, it's hugely interesting for things like marine insurance and very, very topical with COVID. So there'll be some great content for you to hear on that. But equally, there's a couple of softer things that I think are really important that we reflect on with this partnership. And they basically sit around our people. And it's absolutely fantastic. Huge numbers, well, certainly dozens and dozens of Aviva people have already experienced a course or some interaction with Cambridge to help with their own personal development. Some great stuff going on there for our people. And equally, I know a number of Cambridge people have had the opportunity to present and talk to us in a number of different ways and start to experience that commercial side of data science. And hopefully that will continue. Many graduates, well, many more graduates seem to come out of Cambridge and decide they want to choose a career in Aviva around data science. So look, it's that combination of great research, people, and a shared interest in data that makes me so excited about the partnership. Look, it's probably enough from me. Just a couple of bits that I'm really looking forward to on the agenda. Dame Sally Davis. I don't think I've ever spoken to someone who's made me quite so engaged and excited to have a conversation. So really look forward to that part of the agenda. We've got Michaela later talking about about the work she's doing within her PhD, which she's always brilliant value. And finally, we've got our life CFO and former dentist. He found a dentistry too boring, so he decided to become an accountant. But David's going to give his perspective and his commercial perspective on why this partnership is so good later in the agenda. So look, that's it from me. I hope you enjoy it and find it massively entertaining, as well as all the other things around the thought-provoking and indeed the intellectual side of it. I'm going to pass to Andy Neely now, who's going to give a Cambridge perspective on why he's excited about today and the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen, and let me add my welcome as well to everybody that's joining us online. So my name's Andy Neely. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor for Enterprise and Business Relations, and effectively I look after everything at the university to do with innovation, commercialisation, startups, spin-outs, and links with business. And this partnership is a fantastic illustration of the way the university works with business. I mean, I think it brings together, as Owen says, two organisations with different backgrounds, different histories, ours slightly longer, but different people who are exchanging interesting ideas and have a desire to understand what data really means for the world. Cambridge, I mean, if you go back in history around Cambridge and data and the role that the university played in the evolution of computing, we were very early in terms of building some of the first computers. ARM, the company that makes the chips that's in the IP that is in the chips that are in many of our mobile phones, so much in the news at the moment with the discussions about takeovers based on Cambridge IP. You can keep going across the institution. I was talking to people in the clinical school the other day about the way they're using data and the 5 million patients across the east of England to think about new innovations around health. And it's not just in the science-based disciplines, if you like, but the arts and humanities, the social sciences, behavioural questions about how people use data, how they respond to it, privacy and ethics, all of those kind of issues excite people across the institution. And so one of the things that we've tried to do in the university is bring together many of those people through something called C2D3, the Cambridge Centre for Data-Driven Discovery. And it's great that we're partnering with Aviva on that particular issue to do a whole host of interesting research projects. And you're going to hear about a lot of those today through the course of the sessions. In fact, we're going to hear from 3 PhD students shortly about some of the great work that they are doing. The other thing I'd say about the reason that the university partners with industry and organisations is the mission of Cambridge starts with the phrase contribute to society. So what Cambridge is interested in doing is doing fantastic research, doing world-leading research, providing a brilliant education for people, helping people learn, helping them develop their skills. But ultimately, we want to make a difference in the world. And we can only do that at scale and do it on an international basis when we collaborate with organisations that have scale and have that international presence. So part of the value for us in collaboration is that ability to make a difference on a global scale. The other thing that makes partnerships really important for us is the questions that organisations ask and the interesting questions that they then help us ask as researchers across the university. And I think that's one of the reasons why this partnership works so well. There are many people in Aviva and in the university who are building really interesting relationships, exploring issues around data and provoking each other to ask more interesting questions. And fundamentally, that's what the university should be about, asking interesting questions, pushing back the boundaries of knowledge, and then making sure those ideas get out there into the wider world. So you'll hear about a load of those across the course of the session today. I hope you find them interesting and stimulating, and I hope that next time we have this event, we're actually physically together rather than just doing it over Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy and Owen, and just to echo those comments as well. Yeah, hopefully next time we do this next year, we'll able to all be in person. I'm sure a sentiment reflected by everybody on the call. So as both Owen and Andy have mentioned, we're going to get into the detail of the research and the projects we've been doing now through the partnership. So 3 students who are going to share with us the work that they've been doing. First up is Helena Gellison, who's been looking at some work around the factors influencing dementia. Dementia, of course, something that will impact many of our customers, and it's something quite personal to me, having lost my grandfather to dementia a couple of years ago. So I was very pleased that we were able to invest in this great piece of research. So I'm going to hand over to Helena now, and I'll be back after their session.
Hi everyone, my name is Helena Gellison, and today I'm going to give a talk on risk and predictive factors for dementia and dementia-related mortality. This was a project in collaboration with Aviva as part of the PhD industrial internships. And the goal of this project was to identify potentially new factors for risk and also protection from dementia, and to leverage this knowledge for Aviva's products and services. So here's just an overview of the current landscape of dementia risk factors. And the first thing that's really striking is that up to 40% of dementia risk may be within our control. So this is due to, for example, lifestyle factors or also medical conditions associated potentially with lifestyle factors. Many of these are already well known to Aviva and are being used in underwriting procedures. As you can see here, these different arrows go from different life periods of a person. This refers to the life period from which point onwards these become predictive. So from when we can use them to predict dementia risk. Novel factors that we identified that weren't previously used by Aviva include social isolation and education, but these can bear difficulty with respect to measurement, for example, in social isolation, or with actually determining cutoff points at which education could be useful as a predictive factor. So the most striking novel finding here was that hearing loss is a major risk factor for dementia and has not been previously incorporated in any of the risk models. What's really promising about this factor that it is already predictive from midlife onwards, that it has quite a high percentage of individual and independent influence on dementia risk, and that it can be very easily measured. So this could just be in the form of medical records or even self-report. And then this could then be incorporated into enhanced annuity calculations or underwriting. Now, knowing that a large proportion of dementia risk is modifiable within our control, we can then look at the kinds of health behaviours that we might want to target. So here's just an example showing that from the standard health behaviours that are very well known, every single one can provide a unique contribution to assessment of dementia risk. Which means that when we're trying to intervene and help people modify their behavior, one approach could simply be to ask them to modify whichever behavior might be easiest for them to adjust. Another approach that might be potentially more effective would be to look at the relationships between different behaviors. So here, this was a recent study that looked at a network of health behaviors, where across a large number of individuals, they looked at the correlations between different behaviors to then map centrality. Centrality refers to the degree of correlation with a lot of other factors. And here what emerged is that sleep measures of quality and quantity are highly correlated with a lot of other factors. Now, this is not clearly related to causation as of yet, but it could still be an interesting way of looking at those health factors that are central and strongly related to a lot of other ones, to then potentially use these to target first. And this could be done with tools such as the wellness app that Aviva are going to provide to their corporate customers. Now, obviously, with any tool for intervention, it is crucial that individuals engage with those properly to then achieve behavior change. But how can this be measured? So one very interesting approach that health psychology has been taking is to look at control beliefs which help understand why certain individuals might engage with an app and might be successful in modifying their behavior. Control beliefs refers to the extent to which an individual believes that they can modify their behavior and therefore have a positive effect on their personal health. So for example, looking at individuals and determining which ones are low or high in control beliefs before they are given the interaction with the tool could then identify potentially why certain individuals start to engage with the tool very strongly and others might not, which could then be used for different kinds of messaging and strategies to approach different groups of people. Which might then be more effective in facilitating behavior change. So control beliefs could help to inform and adjust design elements of the app, to improve the personalization of these elements, and then to combine objective measures of app usage and goal attainment with those psychological effects to, for example, understand different trajectories people might be taking in the course of using the app. And finally, to communicate both objective engagement metrics and subjective assessment of the app to corporate customers. Now, these are just a couple of examples of how recent developments in epidemiological and psychological research can inform insurance products and services. If you have any more questions regarding further risk factors and their use for underwriting or also for the wellness app, you can contact me here at this email address.
Thank you, Helena. Some great work going on there regarding the factors influencing dementia. Our next student is Michelle Lee. Michelle's been looking at the topic of algorithmic fairness. Data and data science, of course, pervasive across almost every industry today. And the topic of fairness has been on the agenda very sharply in the last few months as well. So we're very proud to be investing in some research into the topic. So I'll hand over now to Michelle with her overview of what she's been doing.
Hi, my name is Michelle Sina Lee, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Computer Science and Technology Department at Cambridge as a part of the Compliant and Accountable Systems Research Group. Algorithms can learn from much more data than humans, identifying patterns in unexpected ways. Sometimes these patterns are associated with who we are. More concerningly, they can be associated with history of unfair discrimination, exclusion, and inequality. For example, self-driving cars can be worse at spotting dark skin tones in pedestrians. Recruiting algorithms can prefer men. Apple Card was investigated by a regulator for their algorithms accused of giving higher credit limits to men than to women. And these algorithmic fairness issues are increasingly making headlines as they're used in high-impact domains, but there is little consensus on how to define, test for, and mitigate unfair algorithmic bias. And algorithmic fairness is a topic that crosses various disciplines, which makes it challenging to agree on a terminology and approach. I have a unique background that encompasses all of these fields. With my undergraduate degree at Stanford was in concentration in decision-making and rationality, with coursework in game theory, behavioral science, philosophy, statistics, research design, as well as computer science. And I've worked in risk analytics at Deloitte for 6 years, co-authoring several white papers on AI governance. And I have my master's in social data science at the Oxford Inner Institute, where I was a part of the digital ethics lab supervised by Luciano Floridi. And academics have introduced dozens of mathematical definitions of fairness, but fairness is not a binary and absolute one-size-fits-all concept. People disagree radically on what it means to be fair because there are multiple competing objectives to consider in any decision. And the fact that it's mathematical might make it seem like it's objective, but each fairness definition represents its own ethical and philosophical values. It also oversimplifies what fairness means, such that it bears little resemblance to the real-life circumstances. My recent paper has drawn from works in ethical philosophy and welfare economics to highlight the gap between these mathematical formalizations and the contextual complexities that affect the definition of what it means to be fair. In addition to the inherent inequalities affecting the ground truth, historical bias in this diagram, there can be biases introduced in a development life cycle that exacerbates or magnifies some of these inequalities. One of the papers I'm working on builds on this framework to create a practical questionnaire that helps guide a model developer to identify potential sources of bias in each stage of the life cycle. And I have a draft of the questionnaire that I'm planning on trialing with industry teams. So I propose thinking about fairness not as an absolute and oversimplified ideal of complete parity, but in relation to other plausible alternative models. Instead of the generalized metric of fairness from 0 to 1, we should be focusing on operationalizing our ethical and practical objectives and quantifying how each model option meets these objectives. So using mortgage lending as an example, I define 2 key objectives. First is greater financial inclusion, giving more loans to more people. Second goal is to increase the approval rates for Black applicants who in the US face historical discrimination that may be inflating their risk profile. And this gives more actionable insights to the mortgage lender. Moving from model NB to RF in this chart results in $55 million of new loans and 10.7 lower percentage points in Black applicants' denial rates. And overall, my thesis will be an end-to-end methodology, framework, and toolkit on how to handle potential unfair and discriminatory outcomes in algorithms, from the methodology to the empirical considerations to specific domain examples. My PhD research aims to move away from the axiomatic reductionist definitions of fairness to provide a holistic framework and methodology for assessing whether or not an algorithm aligns to the decision maker's values. I propose a new approach that operationalizes ethical values into quantifiable metrics to assess the trade-offs between competing objectives. This is an especially important topic in insurance, and through the partnership with Aviva, we are exploring the practical applications of this work in real-life contexts. The risk of unfairness of algorithms is also an opportunity for us to meaningfully debate, define, and formalize what it means to implement a fair decision-making system in each domain. Unlike humans, algorithms are inherently auditable, and this can help us enforce what we want in a fair decision, even in a biased society. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Hopefully you'll agree some really interesting work going on there on a very important topic for all of us. Our final student that we're going to give an overview of the work we've been doing so far through the partnership is Jan Stanzuk. And Jan's been looking at the application of machine learning in ovarian cancer imaging. So ovarian cancer, of course, something that will impact many of our customers. So something very important to many of us. And a really good example of a practical application of data and machine learning to a topic with real tangible outcomes. So I'm going to hand over to Jan now. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Jan Stanczuk and I'm one of the PhD students founded by Aviva. And it's my pleasure to be talking to you today at the Aviva Cambridge Summit and tell you a couple words about my PhD research in deep generative modeling and its applications. So my PhD is a 4-year program, and in my first year, I've been working on several different projects, which have been mainly focused around applications of neural networks in different healthcare problems. The first problem I have been looking at has been investigating the current state-of-the-art methods in automated machine learning. So automated machine learning is the process of automating the machine learning workflow. And I've been especially interested in the model selection and parameter optimization part of this process. So this is a generic data science task that data scientists all over the world are facing every day. And I've been interested in how you can automate the process of selecting the correct machine learning model or a neural network architecture, and then optimizing its hyperparameters to a particular data set that you're working with, how to do all of this in an automated way. And this project has been finalized by a presentation to the Aviva data science team, where they are facing similar challenges, and it has been quite well received. Another project I've been looking at has been investigating the neural networks called normalizing flows. So these are kinds of neural networks which learn probability distributions, and they can be useful, for example, in computer tomography or MRI reconstruction, where we can use a normalizing flow in order to in order to put inside the algorithm the knowledge of how a good solution to our problem should look like. For example, a normalizing flow can learn how a generic good reconstruction looks like, and then this knowledge can be implemented into the algorithm and improve the quality of denoising of the reconstruction, for example. And we have some ideas how to improve this line of work further. The project that I've spent most of my time this year at has been connected with generative adversarial networks, also known as GANs. And these are one of the most powerful generative models that we currently have, but they are still not very well understood. So to showcase how powerful these models are, here you can see 3 pictures. And these are not pictures of any real animals or objects. This has been, in fact, generated. These are fake pictures generated by a computer, by a generative adversarial network. And this is a very generic algorithm that allows you to create fake data which looks like real data, and this can be applicable in variety of contexts. For example, if you have some data which is unethical to share, or you cannot share it due to the privacy constraints, but you would like to show someone data that looks like this real data without violating this ethical or privacy constraints, you could use a GAN to create something, an example like this. And we have been making effort in order to deepen the theoretical understanding of GANs and improve their applications. And we are now working on a paper which clarifies certain theoretical aspects of this algorithm. And last project I have been working on arose due to the COVID-19 pandemic. My supervisor, Professor Karola Szynlib, has initiated this collaboration between many universities and hospitals, where we are developing a COVID diagnostic and prognostic tool which takes in multi-stream healthcare data. And my work in this project is focused on performing robust classification and regression on a clinical data with missing values. So I am investigating, I'm a part of the team, and we are investigating 2 approaches. One is to impute the missing data, so to basically come up with the best guess for the data that we are missing, and then use standard machine learning methodology, or to develop robust algorithms which can be trained on missing data. And this has huge intersection with my research. We are also exploring how deep generative models like GANs can be used for data imputation and these kinds of tasks. And of course, these tasks are not only applicable in healthcare, they are quite generic data science tasks that can come up in all applications all over the world. And that's everything I wanted to tell you about today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jan, and indeed thank you to all of the students for the great work that they're doing, and we look forward to seeing how that progresses. I think you'll agree some really great work there, and we're going to hear a bit later on from some of the future work that we're going to be investing in as well. The next session is one that's very exciting for us, and we're going to be joined by Dame Sally Davis and Owen Morris, who you've already heard from once today. And we're going to be talking about the Trinity Challenge. This is something that was formally launched just on Monday and has already gained the attention of the Secretary General from the World Health Organization, which has been fantastic. So already getting lots of attention, something we're very proud to be involved with. Before we hand over to that session, though, I'm just going to do another plug for the session after that, which is our Q&A. So please, again, if you've joined us a bit late and didn't hear me earlier on, if you're joining us through the portal, you can ask questions on the panel underneath the video. And if you're joining us through YouTube, you'll find that box to the right of the video that you're seeing. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Sally and Owen. And this is a great example of our partnership broadening out. So handing over to those two. Thank you.
Good morning, Sally, and very, very welcome to the Cambridge and Aviva Partnership Conference. It's super that you can join us. I think everyone knows me. I've already introduced myself, but hopefully you could say a couple of words to introduce yourself to everyone and your frankly quite frightening and brilliant career that you've had over the last years.
I've stopped eating people for breakfast a few years ago, don't worry. Owen, it's great to meet you and it's lovely to be here. So if we're in Cambridge and I've got to introduce myself, then clearly I'm the first woman master of Trinity College. I started almost exactly a year ago. Before that, I was the Chief Medical Officer for England and Senior Medical Advisor to the UK government. And before that, I ran research for the Department of Health and set up the National Institute for Health Research and ran it for 10 years with its £1.25 billion of research money. So I'm a clinical doctor who's gone into policy and delivery, I have to say.
Awesome. So look, as we could talk for hours about all of that, I'm sure, but there's one specific topic we were going to try and talk about today, which was the Trinity Challenge that you're heading up and setting up. I just wanted to give you the opportunity just to perhaps tell everyone a little bit about it and why you're excited about it.
I'm terrifically excited because the Trinity Challenge brings together some of the best minds in the world from Aviva and Cambridge University, but many other founding members that we can talk about, including Microsoft, Google, LSE, Northeastern University, Singapore, Hong Kong University. But it brings together these great people to work basically on data with deep analysis to try and stop us having another COVID in the future. So the premise is, if we'd thought really deeply 5 years ago, would we have done things differently? And now, what do we want to do to make sure that in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, we're better off? And clearly, if we explore the data, we can build tools that will perhaps tell us early when something's happened. We can find better ways to handle the medical response, but actually the economic and health recoveries, because, you know, without health, you don't have a strong economy, but without a strong economy, you don't have a good health system.
Yes, the interrelation between those things is just so difficult to understand, and as a data person you look at it and feel hugely excited about the opportunity to sort of take part in helping to understand that. In terms of your thinking around the different components of that and how we start to chunk that down into separate parts of the challenge, have you thought about that, and what do you think those are?
So we think there's three big areas. There's the surfacing, there's something we need to be aware of and take action on. There's the health response, and then the recovery, which is both health and economic. And underneath these big areas, we've set up a number of challenge questions and then some exemplars about how you might answer them. So what would an early warning system look like? If we knew the genomes of all the coronaviruses, would that stimulate the pharmaceutical industry to have a look on their shelves and see if there were drugs that might work if one of these popped out into humans, or to get a pre-pandemic vaccine? To go to the other end of the economic recovery, if we could understand what is the minimum type of lockdown you would need for safety, for health, then you might do less damage to the economy. So can you lock down and open in a much safer way? What is it that people are doing, and how can one restructure economies so that they're not as vulnerable? And that needs mobility data, economic data, and for the health response, clearly there's the health system and medical response, but there's the behavioural response about why do people, some of them wear masks and others not? Why do some people not bother to socially distance? We need to know what's the right message, how to deliver that message, who it should come from, and on what platform to have an impact so people look after themselves, their families and communities, and thus our economy.
Yeah. No, I think that's enormously helpful. I mean, just from an insurance perspective, you know, we protected customers for centuries here in the 320 years of Aviva. Not quite as old as Cambridge, but a fairly old insurance company. And look, these are one of the, I mean, pandemic risk is one of those really, really big systemic risks we find tough to tackle, and it's you only have to look at the economic cost to realise that insurance on its own isn't going to be able to solve all of this globally. And so we're really keen to work with you guys and get involved and work out how can we as insurers play our part in that really exciting ecosystem of people you've brought together, and with the public sector and with the private sector and with academia. And that's a really exciting approach. In terms of next steps and how we think about going from here, I don't know if you want to give anyone any insight into the timings of the challenge and exactly what we're going to be asking people to do and when we're going to bring it together.
So we're launching on Monday the 14th of September, at which point our website will go live and people will then be able to read about it, but they'll be able to see the 3 big areas for the questions and the exemplar questions underneath. We don't mind if people pick other questions and say, I think I can make a difference. What we're looking for is people coming together and using data, mainly quantitative, but some qualitative as well about behaviour may well be important, in order to look for new insights that could lead to different ways of doing things or tools that can be scalable. This is about global public good. This is not about making lots of money and saving the rich. It's about global public goods. So people will be able to look at the website, see the questions, see who is available to work with, because we expect people to work in challenge teams and often with the founders, though they may bring in other people. And importantly, we've been designing a data catalogue. So that will go live. It'll be updated regularly so people can see, oh, that data's open, and they don't have to actually apply for the challenge. They could go and use it. Or, oh, that partner has that data. I'd like to work with them and try and answer question X or Y, and then they can put in an expression of interest and application. So anyone can join in wherever they are in the world. Meanwhile, we're pushing all our founder members, as you know, to start collaborations between the founder members, which is one of the strengths of Aviva and Cambridge working together through our shared centre, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Something you said about zoonotic diseases, and zoonotic is a word, you know, a sort of amateur mathematician, and it's not a word that instantly jumped to my mind, but it's now in the front of all our minds, and a whole wide amount of public health theory has suddenly become much more mainstream. I just wondered your views on that, and what a time for science and data this is, just more broadly, to sort of introduce some of these topics. And I don't know if we just broaden the discussion slightly. I don't know if you've got a perspective on that, but it's really interesting.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, when I became CMO, I'm not a public health doctor. I'm a hematologist, a sickle cell disease doctor. So I had to learn all about this. And one of the pushes for me about the Trinity Challenge is that we're beginning to look at different ways of modeling and using mathematical data and numerical data and people in different ways. How come that we're using a flu model from 13 years ago? We have fabulous people in your sort of company and in the universities who could do things differently that might work better. So it is interesting, isn't it? We're all over Zoom drinks or other discussions talking about things we were never talking about, but that richness will change our response. It'll make us better at finding solutions so that we're never hit like this again.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the economic impacts, one of the observations I had initially when we thought about this from an insurance perspective was these things are simply too big to insure. And I think that was generally the agreed, you either have virtually no claims because something doesn't happen, or you get and actually one of the things I'm quite excited about is the option to mitigate and intercept these types of future epidemics on this scale much earlier, because I think that is the way that, to your point, you avoid the economic impact. Our customers, both businesses and private individuals, can benefit from not having the disruption in the first place. And I'm sure we spend a lot of time in the insurance industry looking really hard to mitigate risk so our customers don't have to claim in the first place. And this is a really big example of how I think I'm really excited about working together to try and solve some of that.
Fantastic, and I think we can make a difference. And it all comes back to something that doctors don't normally think about, and it's return on investment. If we invest now in tools to handle things better, prevent and handle, then we won't have to expend this ridiculous amount of money. Oh, if only that had gone into people's health and education and better housing. We're doing this the wrong way, and we can turn it around. But, you know, if we invest now in preventing obesity and preventing disease, it'll pay off for society and everything too. So it's interesting that the insurance industry and the world I come from actually have shared objectives of reducing problems, because then you have more money to spend on good things.
Yeah, well, it certainly does. And it's interesting, the interconnectivity that this sort of pandemic highlights. And we're all, the private sector, the public sector, every individual is connected in a way that is much more intimate, I think, than we perhaps thought, or some of us realised, unless you went deep into the economic theory. And it is such a delicate balancing act. And it's very hard to judge others when they're making these sorts of decisions, because you have to have a successful economy, and we have to make that robust, because that pays for all the really good things that we want to see. And it's fascinating how we're having to make choices between public health and the broader economy, because, you know, with a 5-year lens, the outcome is quite different from a 5-month lens, is quite different from a 5-day lens. And I think it's look, I'm just so excited about being a part of the Trinity Challenge. I know we've hugely got huge value already from our partnership with Cambridge, and look, it's great to be part of it. So I think from my perspective, I think that's been wonderful. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to quickly add to the discussion.
A big thank you to you, Owen, but to Aviva and actually Anna Vignoles, who from the Cambridge side has led much of our discussion with you. Because you are one of our anchor founding partners. You came in early, you've helped us shape it, and you're a great partner. So thank you for joining in. And wouldn't it be great if you won? Let's do that.
Oh, there's nothing like winning. I mean, yes, it's one of those things, we do like to win, but yeah, I think the good news is for this, everyone wins. It's not just a case of us winning. I think if we could all win, I think, as we said, everyone's interconnected. So brilliant. Thank you so much for coming, Sally. And it's lovely to get your perspective. And look, it's going to be such an exciting time. Thank you.
It is. And good luck. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sally and Owen, for that. Hopefully you agree, a fascinating conversation, and we're really excited to see how the Trinity Challenge progresses. As ever, you can find more about the partnership and what we're up to, including the Trinity Challenge, and I need to get this right, at cam.ac.uk/business/Aviva. We might need to work on getting a simpler one for that, but there's plenty of information on there on everything we're doing in the partnership, including what you've heard from the students so far and the future work we're going to be doing as well. We're going to be moving to our Q&A session now with both Orlando and Carola. And just another prompt again, I've started to see some coming through, which is great, but on YouTube, you can find the question window to the right of the video. And if you're joining us through the portal, you can see that underneath the video. So we're joined now by both Orlando and Carola. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So over to you first, Carola.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. I'm very excited about this event. So thanks a lot for inviting me. So to briefly introduce myself, I'm Carola Schönlieb. I'm Professor of Applied Mathematics in Cambridge, where I'm wearing several hats. I'm co-chair of C2D3 that Andy alluded to already at the beginning. I'm director of the CCIMI, the Cantor Capital Institute for the Mathematics of Information, which is a PhD training program in the mathematical data science. I'm also director of a Center for the Mathematics of Information in Healthcare. So one of my interests very much lies in healthcare data analysis. And I'm heading up a research group on image analysis.
Great stuff. And Orlando, a brief introduction from you.
Oh yeah, thank you. And thank you all for joining. Very, very exciting. My name's Orlando Machado. I am Chief Data Scientist at Aviva, which means I'm responsible for a number of areas around pushing our data science capability forward. A little bit of background on me. For the last 25 years or so, I've been working in the field that is now known as data science, was previously maybe applied statistical modeling. I've worked at a number of companies in the commercial sector. So prior to Aviva, I was Chief Data Scientist at Money Supermarket, and I also worked at dunnhumby, which is the company best known for the data science behind the Tesco club cards, are really using data to understand customers much better. But originally, if you wind back a few years before that, I was in academia. So I was actually carrying out applied statistical modeling in academia, doing the kind of thing that would now be called machine learning. As far as today is concerned, I'm part of the joint executive committee that we have between Aviva and Cambridge as part of the Centre for Data-Driven Discovery.
Great stuff, thank you. So we'll head straight into it. We've got a few questions to get us started, and then we're starting to see some questions coming through, so please do keep those coming. Over to you first, Carola. I guess getting right to the heart of it, what is the value for an organisation like Cambridge University working with industry?
So let me maybe start with a more personal perspective and then get a bit more broader. So I'm what you broadly speaking would call a data analyst, more specifically an applied mathematician developing new theory and methodology for solving data problems. Now, as such, you can imagine a lot of the work that I and the people in my research group are doing is quite abstract and not necessarily customized to a particular problem. However, applied problems, as they come up in industry, are offering a wonderful source of inspiration for what the important questions are that we mathematicians should be focusing on. And so when doing mathematical research, we might even be solving some of these applied problems along the way. And in fact, my research group is solving a lot of these applied problems along the way. So I'm personally collaborating with Aviva through them sponsoring a PhD student whom you heard before, Jan Stanchuk. And especially for these early career researchers such as Jan, I can see various opportunities coming up from collaborating with industry. And I think this is generally true for PhD students all across the board. Of course, first of all, it's an excellent opportunity to be getting an idea of what work, what research in the real world looks like. And a company like Aviva, and that's a comment now about, in general, the university's benefit of collaborating with Aviva, has such a broad portfolio of interests and associated mathematical problems that working with them is really enriching. And last but not least, also for such early career guys such as Jan, soft skills training that they acquire when collaborating with a multidisciplinary team, with researchers from all kinds of backgrounds, is really super in terms of building their communication skills, in terms of teamwork, and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you. And I suppose the other side of that, Orlando, what's the kind of other side of what the value we see in working with academia?
Yeah, I think maybe it's worth thinking about the way that Aviva sees data science generally. You think about the point that Owen made, and that insurance has always been a data-driven discipline. But these days, data science is not a sideline for us. It's absolutely core to our business. So we want to use data science to understand risk better so that we can set our prices to be more competitive. We might want to use data science to make the claims experience for customers a bit slicker, a bit more seamless. We equally might want to use data science to understand each individual customer better. We have 30 million customers. We can use data science to understand them individually so that we can reflect their needs in the products that we develop. So data science is absolutely core to our business. And I think the way that we want to use academic partnerships, in Cambridge in particular, is to help keep pushing that data science capability forward. And I think I'd say we want to use, there are two main areas in which we want to do that. One of them is research. There are many areas where we think that actually Cambridge is way better placed to research on our behalf than we are ourselves. That could be for the fact that we're maybe using a cutting edge technique. So we want to use the leading edge of academia to help us with that. It might be that actually we've got a longer term problem, because quite often commercial institutions will find themselves dwelling on shorter term problems, and we want to invest in somebody that can help us solve a problem for the long term. And I think the other area is that some of the research problems that we're looking at are areas where a third party is actually useful to us. I think, you know, we've talked about algorithmic fairness, or we've talked about some of the ethical implications of using data science. And I think in those kind of examples, it's really useful to us to have a third party that we can partner with, but also a third party that is going to the discipline of peer review, because we don't want to be marking our own homework in an area that's as important as something like the ethics of using data, because we want to use that to earn the trust of our customers. So that's the research part, that's what we get out of it. The other part is the talent development, you know, side of the bargain, because we're already seeing Aviva staff benefiting from training and development material produced by our colleagues at Cambridge and our partners at Cambridge. So partnering with an academic institution is a really good way of keeping data science skills up to speed. And I think it's particularly important when the pace of change in techniques is so fast as it is today.
That's great. Thank you for that. We're going to speed up a little bit now. So if you hopefully you don't mind me prompting you for slightly punchier answers on these, so we can fit as many in. We're starting to get some questions coming through from our viewers. Just really quickly, I guess, Carola, for you, what makes a collaboration like this work well? What would be the kind of one or two things that you point at?
Yeah, so I think the key for a successful working relationship between academia and industry is to have a joint objective. And this seems natural, but I think what it needs is individuals on both sides that are genuinely interested to learn from each other and to define this particular objective for the joint research. And that in turn also needs mutual respect for each other. And again, this seems like a given, but what I mean here is that really both sides don't see one or the other as a service provider, but really as someone with their own interests and aspirations. And to find the common ground that serves both, that's, I think, the best way to a successful collaboration.
Yeah, and I think anything to add to that, Orlando, from our perspective?
I think I would echo those points. I think there's no substitute for that kind of joint objective, the mutual respect. I think that's absolutely critical. I think the only thing to add is that when it comes to the more day-to-day running of the relationship, we think about each individual project and how it has benefit to both parties. So we think about competitive advantage, we think about societal impact, and also advancing the field of data science. And if a project can tick all of those boxes, then I think it's going to be a candidate for us to invest in, because it's got enough joint interest from both sides for us to progress it.
Yeah, and just following up on that, we've had a couple of questions come in. So how did the partnership actually come about from our side, from the Aviva side? Can you just give a kind of couple of points on why we started to explore a partnership?
I think I had worked in academic partnerships in the past. I know a couple of other people at Aviva had done the same. So we started a discussion internally, really around the areas about how we push our capability forward, how we can research areas that are slightly longer term, and how we can take advantage of any kind of partner to help facilitate that. Well, I think we recognized very quickly that there were many areas that we weren't in a good place necessarily to invest in ourselves or to actually carry out ourselves. We have really good data science capability within Aviva, but certainly that we're not at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge of technical development in the way that Cambridge would always be. Equally, we have a good long-term outlook on our problems that we're trying to solve. But if we partner with someone like Cambridge, we can start to plan much longer time horizons. So I think quite quickly we recognise that firstly, it would allow us to solve some problems that maybe would take a bit longer. You know, the Trinity Challenge is a great example of that kind of problem. But also we could maybe be a little bit more experimental, thinking about the topics of generative, modelling, deep neural networks. We know that that's going to have some value for us somewhere. We can't always understand exactly where that's going to be, but we can afford to experiment if we're going to plan to a slightly longer time horizon. So I think all the conditions were there for us to want to partner.
Thanks. We're going to probably have another three or so minutes, 4 minutes maybe we can fit in. So Carola, just on the other side of that question, I guess, which is why C2D3 and as Orlando mentioned, the longer term there, what's the longer term vision for C2D3 from the Cambridge perspective?
Right. So maybe just a few words about C2D3 before I answer this this question. So C2D3, as Andy said before, is the Cambridge Center for Data-Driven Discovery. And it's really, you can view it as Cambridge's collaborative answer to big data. So it brings together researchers and expertise from across the academic departments and industry to drive research into the analysis, understanding, and use of data science. So now what does C2D3 do actually, and what it in turn is our ambition for the future? So for data science to grow and to produce real innovations, interdisciplinarity is key. And the right people talking to each other is key. The theorist knowing what the important challenges are is key. At the same time, the practitioners knowing what the data science capabilities are is key. So for these two working together to help solve actual societal, economic, industrial challenges is what it takes for data science to have a real impact. And this is really how C2D3 sees its role, to bring these people together and facilitate the research. So what C2D3's ambition is to establish Cambridge further in this area, develop it into one of the top addresses worldwide when it comes to data science, and data science in particular in all these different disciplines. Cambridge is already the host of research excellence and excellence in teaching. So C2D3's role is really the one of a research facilitator and also a medium for showcasing the exciting research that is coming out of Cambridge.
Fantastic. A couple more questions we've had come in from the chats here, which I think are really good. I'm going to try and join a couple together here. Great to see a company like Aviva investing in the future. How theoretical is the research? We've touched on that a bit. And are you looking for immediate payback? And Orlando, I'll put this one to you, but joining it up with another point we've made, which is if the research comes across something with quantitative outcome, but it's maybe tricky to explain that qualitatively speaking, but it has a really good impact for customers and maybe even commercially for Aviva, how would we approach, squaring off those two things?
I think one of the motivations behind this partnership is that we're not constrained to just short-term problems. We're already talking with Dame Sally Davis about the problem of solving future pandemics, but equally some of the problems around the explainability of algorithms. These aren't things that we're going to solve in a few weeks or a few months. These are things that might take a few years to solve. So part of the reason that we're engaging in this partnership is that we can solve slightly longer term some problems. I think the question around is, can we get a big benefit from this that we can't necessarily explain? I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but if it's around the kind of the pure data science side of this, if it's around, is there a data science technique that maybe we can't explain, but we see that it seems to be beneficial or predictive? I think our approach then is to try to explain it. And we're equally investing alongside investment in techniques that we believe to be more predictive. We're also investing in techniques to make data science much more explainable. We think it's extremely important that we can explain what we're doing to customers, to regulators, to investors, and to our staff, because we get questions on the phone about, why has my price gone up or down? We want our staff to be equipped with these kind of answers. So the explainability of whatever it is that we're doing is equally important, and it's going to be more important as we get into more and more data sources, a greater variety of data sources, and more potentially complex data science techniques.
Yeah, fantastic. And Carola, just last one for you, and then we'll round off the session. Really quickly, are there any particular research interests from your side or areas that we haven't yet explored through the partnership that you think would be, of good value for us to look at?
Again, I think we are exploring in this partnership with you already a lot of questions across the board. So the breadth within data science, I would say, is pretty remarkable. Questions that we haven't touched upon. I mean, there are tons of questions around, and I have a lot of in mind from the more theoretical side. Orlando touched upon explainability, but I think another question is computability even. Can we actually, even if in theory one could compute an optimal solution, can we do this in reality? And how long does it take us? Uncertainty quantification is another topic that I think is hugely important, and also even practical questions behind how do you use uncertainty quantifications for actual specific problems? How do you turn this uncertainty and involve this uncertainty into decision making?
Great, yeah. I mean, as you said, there's a whole range of topics there for us to really go after. We'll round off that session. So thank you both very much for your open and honest answers on that. Hopefully been interesting for our viewers to listen to, as ever they can find out more by the website I mentioned earlier on. We had one more question come in, which is really great to see actually, which is that the point is that customers themselves are actually more interested in companies being forward thinking and investing in these types of things. So are we encouraging other industry partners to join C2D3? The resounding answer to that, of course, is yes. If anybody on the call is interested in understanding what the partnership does more, or indeed how they can be involved, please do get in touch with us, and you can do that through the website I said earlier, and later on I'll give you an email address as well that you can do it. So for now though, thank you to Orlando and Carola. That's been really fascinating, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. So we are now going to hear from our 2020 research projects, and we're very excited to be joined by both Alexandra Brintrup and John Simons, who are going to be talking to us about the work they're doing. And Alexandra is going to be joined by Edward, who's working with her on this. Alexandra and John are both supervisors on these projects. Alexandra, hopefully you're all teed up and ready to go, and we're going to hand over to you. And you've been looking with Edward at the very exciting area of supply chain risk. So handing over to you, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good to go. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra Brintrup. I'm a lecturer in digital manufacturing, and I lead a research group within the Department of Engineering called Manufacturing Analytics. So today I'll be talking about an exciting project that we are just starting this October with Aviva on supply chain risk. So from the Cambridge side, we have got Mr. Edward Kosasi involved, who is the PhD candidate in the project, and then myself as the principal investigator. From the Aviva side, we have got Mark Dunham, Spencer Pimley, and Paul Sullivan. Apologies, I do not have their pictures on these slides. So what are supply chains? So supply chains form when a firm procures goods or services from another firm for various reasons, and thus becomes dependent to it. So the idea of supply chains have been around since 1960s, but really picked up around 1980s with the outsourcing boom and the Western world starting to imitate the lean practices of Japanese firms. The firms have focused on their core capabilities while they scaled up production, buying goods and services from external organizations in this period. So the fascinating field of supply chain management itself as an academic field investigates planning, coordination, and also relationships, and how know-how is transferred between firms, as well as monetary and other capital flows across these chains. So while supply chains are essential in allowing us as consumers to have access to a wide range of goods and that are also economically reasonably priced as a result of firms passing their savings on to us, they also pose immense challenges, especially in today's volatile world. So supply chains have become more global, and they have become longer, and that has increased interdependency between firms and have caused a lack of visibility and thus exposure to potential risk. So if you can imagine that a car has about 40,000 parts and 70% of these are outsourced, a plane would have about 4 million parts and about 80% of these would be outsourced. So you might have noticed that I keep saying supply chains, but in reality, the shape of a supply chain is actually a network. So the term network has been in the mouths of operations management and manufacturing engineering since about 2 decades now. And many researchers have hinted in the past that when companies procure goods from one another, they have actually no control over whom those suppliers are buying from. And what might, as a result, emerge is a network of intertwined relationships, but not a linear chain. Yet when we look at textbooks, we see very simple, simplistic linear descriptions of these types of formations. So why that distinction between a chain and a network is important is because complexity affects a system's robustness. So the way in which relationships are structured would impact how and if events can cascade throughout a network. And we have conducted some of the first empirical studies which looked at data at large scale on supply chains, which you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, that would show the automotive and the aerospace industries. And you can clearly see network patterns emerging, which are detectable, and we can use these patterns to understand how disruptions will cascade. So in this particular project with Aviva, we will be looking at understanding how we can improve supply chain ecosystem visibility and develop tools to understand risk exposure. So COVID-19 and Brexit are kind of extreme examples, of course, of the need to model supply chain risk in a responsive manner. Our partners in Aviva have told us that the business interruption share of property claims have doubled in the last 10 years. So it's not just those one-off big events, but events that happen on a day-to-day basis, the small events that also are impacting business interruption risks. So some of the methods that we will be looking at are stemming from our previous projects, which automatically mapped supply chains from publicly available data using natural language processing, and also predicted hidden links based on our incomplete data. So on the right-hand side, you can see some of our previous work on the automotive sector, where we looked at product portfolios of suppliers and their existing connections. We were able to tease out potential relations with about 70% accuracy just by parsing links, such as, and trying to understand and extract relationships, such as leather producers supplying to car seat producers and those supplying to OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, without any input of expertise on actually car design. So we would like to improve these algorithms by adding more features and make it more specialized to various different sectors. We are starting to see, for example, how we can predict product ingredients, such as palm oil, by looking at food labels from supermarkets, which can then tell us potential interdependencies, because again, as an example, palm oil would be produced in mostly within the world in Indonesia. We can then use those potential interdependencies to model systemic risk and understand how disruptions may be cascading. So just to give you an idea of what we will be doing in the coming months, it will be about asking the right questions. So we will start by identifying those variables that could help us understand company dependencies most, which data sets would be currently available for collecting data, and how can those data sets be used to understand, to extract useful and meaningful information that can go towards mapping supply chains. And then how can we develop prediction methods to fill the gaps in our knowledge at the firm level, at the supply chain and ecosystem level, and how these can be validated using various case studies. We will then be looking at, once we have supply chain maps and tools to predict our gaps in those supply chain maps, we will be looking at risks. How can we identify the main risks, and how can we monitor those so that we can get valuable estimates on individual and ecosystem risk. So that's about it from us. It's a project that's just starting, but we would love to hear your views. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please use any of those emails, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'm going to need to do unmute. I thought I'd get away without doing that through the session, but I think once will be okay. Thank you very much, Alexandra and Edward, for that fascinating view into what we're doing there. We're going to hand straight over now to John Simons, who's looking at the topic of cognitive resilience. I think something, again, that's perhaps been brought into a bit of focus over everything that's been going on in the world over the last few months. But this broadly is around the ability of the brain to buffer against disease and trauma. Hopefully I've got that right, John, but I'm sure you'll give us more info now. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, and hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. So I'm John Simons. I'm professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Cambridge and also deputy head of the School of Biological Sciences with responsibility for research strategy. So very interested in promoting the links with industry, and the links we've got with Aviva are fantastic, and we hope that we can continue those in the future. This project I'm going to briefly present to you today is work that leads on from the project that Helena Gellison carried out with Aviva that you heard about earlier. Helena is a PhD student in my lab, and we've just now recruited a new PhD student to take this work forward. So Jess McMaster will be starting in a couple of weeks. And the purpose of this new project is to try and understand this concept that has been termed in the literature cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve is a concept that we think exists. It's something that's used to explain why some people are able to do very well in terms of aging. Their cognitive abilities continue for a very long time and continue at quite a high level, whereas there are other individuals whose cognitive abilities decline as they get older and decline in quite a significant way. And we think that there's something that explains what differentiates these individuals, and it might be something that might perhaps be modifiable. So there may well be things that go on in midlife, for example, earlier on in life, that we might be able to change, we might be able to do something about, that could help turn somebody from someone with low cognitive reserve into somebody with higher cognitive reserve, and therefore somebody who might be able to age more successfully, if you like, and perhaps stave off the onslaught of dementia and other kinds of cognitive decline that are associated with age that Helena talked about. So this PhD project with Jess, that's going to be starting in a couple of weeks, is going to try and understand what the factors might be that can help to determine whether somebody is going to be resilient to the kinds of age-related decline that is so typical. We'll be looking at a number of different factors, so demographic factors such as age and sex and education, socioeconomic status, for example. Also things like to do with health, so to do with diet, to do with exercise, the kinds of substances people might use if they do, and to do with sleep. So sleep quality is also something that's thought to be quite important for thinking about age-related cognitive decline. We'll look at a lot of lifestyle activities. So these are things that people might do in early life or middle age that some suggestions in some of the literature might suggest might have some kind of an impact on cognitive resilience, on stimulating cognitive abilities, stimulating cognitive function in later life. So things like travel, a variety of social outings and social interactions, doing something cognitively challenging like learning a musical instrument or learning a second language, taking up a new artistic pastime, in something as simple as reading. There is some data out there that suggests all of these things can be useful for maintaining cognitive reserve. So this idea of, sort of exercising your cognitive abilities in the same way that you might exercise a particular muscle group to get good at a particular sport, you can also exercise the brain. And in some ways, perhaps, keep that muscle working well, even though we might be getting older. And one of the things we're going to try to work on is to look at how we can maybe tell in middle age whether there are people who are going to be experiencing the first signs of age-related cognitive decline, or whether people are aging perhaps a bit more successfully and their cognitive abilities are preserved. One of the most sensitive measures, one of the first things that tends to be reported as being a concern as people age, is their memory. So that's the cognitive ability we're going to be focusing on in this project. Now, the difficulty is that standard memory tasks that are used in the clinic, for example, are often just asking whether people remember something or they don't remember something. So you might learn a list of words and then be asked, do you remember this word? Was that on the list? Yes or no? And that's very good for identifying whether somebody remembers something or whether they don't remember it. But it's a bit of a blunt tool. It's not very good for being a sensitive measure to try and to get at the very subtle memory changes that might be evident in middle age and before people have incipient cognitive decline, just when it's just at the sort of precursor and they're just starting perhaps to have some subtle memory deficits. So we're going to draw on some work we've been doing in the lab for the last few years, where we've been developing a much more sensitive measure of cognitive ability that measures the precision with which people are able to remember things. So in this sort of a task, I'll just present a quick example of this. You might study a scene where you have a number of everyday objects, and those objects are located in a random location on the screen, in a random orientation, random, different ways up, and in a completely random color. And then in the memory test phase, you're presented with the item again that you've studied before, and you can rotate in a kind of continuous way using a response wheel, rotate the object around to the orientation, the precise orientation that you think it was studied in, to the precise location, exactly where it was on the screen that you think it was studied in, and indeed change the color to the precise color that you think it was studied in, that precise shade of blue. And by doing that, we're able to identify, and we've done some previous work that's identified different areas of the brain, different brain networks that are responsible for remembering whether you remember something or you've forgotten something. And that's an area called the hippocampus in the middle of the brain that's very important for those sort of rudimentary aspects of memory. And then a very different region in the left angular gyrus towards the back of the brain, the top of the brain, that seems to be sensitive to the precision with which we're able to remember things. So healthy volunteers, when they come into the scanner, for example, if they remember something very precisely, they activate this region more than if they remember something a bit less precisely. Then that region doesn't activate quite so much. And what we've been able to show just very recently in some work that's come out in the last few months is that when we take a group of younger adults and older adults who perform, the older adults are very high functioning older adults, in terms of their retrieval success, so whether they remember something or they forget it, they're no different to the younger adults in our study, but we're able to separate them in terms of memory precision. So you can see this effect here of a very significant difference in terms of the precision with which the older adults are able to remember these items, despite the fact that their sort of yes-no memory is just as good as younger adults. And so the purpose of this project is to try to determine what the factors are that we can identify that will correlate with memory precision in middle age, and which may then go on to predict whether those people are going to be more or less resilient to subsequent cognitive decline. And the eventual sort of ultimate aim of this work, this is going to be a long line of research, but eventually somewhere down the line, the idea will be whether we can identify with perhaps just a few questions that we can ask people, over the phone or something, those issues, the people that are going to identify people who might be likely to age more successfully than others. And then also perhaps to be able to offer some modifiable information, whether it's strategies or advice or guidance or other things that people can incorporate into their lives that might help to support and extend cognitive function. And perhaps this may be a holy grail, but perhaps to stave off the onslaught of dementia and age-related cognitive decline. So thanks very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, John. And indeed to all of our students and supervisors who've spoken to us today, I think a real skill there in being able to take complex topics and explain them in a very simple way. So it's something that we're very glad that you could do, and I'm sure everybody on the call appreciates it as well. So thank you for everybody who's given us insight into the work they're doing today. We're coming towards the end of our agenda now, and we're going to hear from David Rogers, who is the CFO of our UK Life business, and also a member of the management team for the partnership. Before we hear from David, though, I just want to do a couple of plugs. So you can put into your search bar the terms Cambridge Aviva, and that should bring up in the search there the link that I mentioned earlier on. And you should be able to navigate and find your way to lots of the content that we've got available for the partnership. And on there, you'll be able to find some podcasts as well, links to podcasts that we've been doing that cover some of the topics you've heard about today to hear a little bit more, and indeed some broader topics as well. So please do go and have a look at that. If anybody on the call today is interested in getting in touch and hearing a bit more about how you can be involved in any of the research, or indeed as part of C2D3, you can contact us on data partnerships, all one word, no dot in there. So data partnerships @aviva.com. So please do get in touch if you'd like to hear more from any of us. So I'm going to hand over to David Rogers now. And then after that, we'll be back with Orlando, who will close out the event. So thank you from me, and over to David and Orlando.
So my role is I'm the CFO, the Chief Finance Officer for Aviva's UK Life business. So this is the biggest life company in the UK. I've worked for Aviva for about 23 years. So I started working in our healthcare business. I've worked in our digital business as well, and first got involved in the partnership when I was CFO of our digital business. So this is an area that's really close to my heart, and I've been delighted to be involved in the partnership right from its very kickoff, and very good to be involved now as we're celebrating the successes that we've already had. I think there were 5 things that were front of my mind when we were starting the partnership with Cambridge University. The first was the opportunity to support really high quality research work that we were collectively undertaking on key issues that are important both to us and to society. And that would be things like climate change, health, and other things as well. The second thing was to build the skills of our team, and through training, through the opportunity to work together, to keep our skills sharp and to develop those skills of the Aviva team. Thirdly, it was about how we apply those that learning, those benefits within the organization as well. So this was applied data-driven discovery rather than just theoretical. So the ability to take that learning and apply it in Aviva. And then underpinning all of that, this needed to be a partnership that benefited both parties, that really builds a sustainable relationship. And finally, and also really importantly, it needed something where there was good chemistry between the teams, where we got good aligned interests and a really good, strong working relationship. And those were my 5 things. And I think we've really delivered on all of those 5 things during the first year of the partnership. Yes, I think it's been a resounding success. And while it's still relatively early days, and we're still building our portfolio of projects, if we look at the things that we're working on now, these absolutely meet the criteria of being things that are important areas where we can make a meaningful contribution. And if I just look at the things that we've been talking about today, algorithmic fairness, study on dementia, machine learning on ovarian cancer, supply chain, cognitive resilience, all of those things really important to society, and therefore helping to drive solutions and develop solutions and understanding, really important. So we're working on stuff that's important and we're doing good work. And I think that therefore does absolutely mean that we're hitting that fundamental objective of the partnership we've got. I think also we're seeing the impact of Aviva working with Cambridge come through in how we're keeping our skills sharp. This is something that the Aviva team are really valuing. It's providing great support to their development. And so we're meeting that requirement as well. And I think finally, just from the word go, this has been a very easy relationship for both sides. We've been very aligned in terms of the working relationship and the objectives, and that's meant our discussions have been very positive, and we're very focused on how we build and develop what we're doing. The more we talk together about the opportunities, the more you get the sense that we're just scratching the surface of the work that can be done. We're aiming to tackle big, important issues, and this isn't something we're going to solve or deliver in a year. It's something that we're going to build our understanding and the portfolio of projects that we've got over a period of time. So the more we think about it, the more opportunity there is to deepen and develop the relationship. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. Our challenge is how we cope with that and how we ration and prioritize. But that's a great problem to have. So I think we're working really well together. I think we've got some really important work that's been done. And I think we can see lots of potential for growing this in the future. So for me, that all means that we've got a really important sustainable project, and that I think is the thing that excites me most, is that there's that ability to build on what we've done from the sort of the solid foundations we've got now and continue to develop this over a large number of years. So from an Aviva perspective, we're delighted with how this partnership is working. Big thanks from us to everybody on the Cambridge side who's involved in this, and we're very enthusiastic and keen to continue to develop this relationship and to build the portfolio of work that we've got over the coming year.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Steph. It's fantastic to have the support of one of our CFOs as part of the management team for our partnership. Now, all that's left for me to do now is to wrap up this session. So I hope it's given you an insight into some of the opportunities and possibilities from collaborations between industry and academia. Just reflecting on some of the messages that we've heard. Early on, we heard Andy Neely talking about wanting to have impact at a global scale. And not much later, we heard Owen Morris talking to Dame Sally Davis about using data science to try to prevent future pandemics. So hopefully we're delivering against the brief of trying to set ourselves big problems. A very big thank you from me to our PhD students and supervisors. I hope that's given you an insight into the kind of work that we're doing. We set them a brief of trying to present a very complex topic in about 5 minutes. I think they did a fantastic job, so a big thank you for that. Just to wrap up with a couple of final thoughts, I think if you're thinking about the opportunities of partnering between industry and academia, I hope we've shown that we can help solve big problems, not just in theory, but also in practice. I hope we've also shown that we can have an impact on skills development. From an Aviva perspective, we're learning so much from our partners at Cambridge, but we also hear from our partners at Cambridge that are learning a lot from us, being inspired by big industrial problems, and also learning some of the social skills that are so important to get data science to work in practice. The point from us is that this is just the beginning. We've started this partnership a year ago. We've got many more things to come. We've got many more research projects, and we hope to welcome new industrial partners into the Cambridge Centre for Data-Driven Discovery. So please do get involved, do get in touch if you want to hear more. We'd love to hear from you. So final thing for me, a big thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think you've done a fantastic job. Thank you to Oliver, who's in our studio. He's working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to piece everything together and make it seamless. And a big thank you to everyone that's tuned in. It's been extremely exciting for us to host this event live on YouTube. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've taken some value from it. I hope to see you all really soon. We want to hold this event in the future. We want it to be live. So with a bit of luck, we'll see you all in person very soon. But other than that, just a big thank you from me. Goodbye.